Chapter 6, Fundamental 1, Eye Contact and Nonverbal Communication. Eye contact is a very basic way that human beings connect with one another. It is also one of the most conspicuous traits missing in our children. Whether your child is a nonverbal 3-year-old diagnosed with severe autism or a 17-year-old with Asperger's syndrome, eye contact is very likely something your son or daughter struggles with. This makes total sense given that autism is a social relational disorder and eye contact is one of the most powerful ways to bond interpersonally. The largest concern with low eye contact is the correspondingly low social connection that goes with it. If you want your child to progress in the area of socialization, improving eye contact is a must. However, the limited number of behavioral programs that work on eye contact tend to do so, not surprisingly, in a behavioral way. These approaches usually train children to give eye contact as a behavior. For example, look at me, look at me, look at me if you want to be allowed to play with the toy. Since the main point of eye contact is human connection, we want our children to look because they want to. This entails making eye contact fun, easy, and very celebrated. The more they look, the more they learn. This is a saying that I picked up from my sister Bryn. What it articulates is the direct correlation between how much our children look and how much they learn, take in, and develop. Looking helps our children to speak because they are looking at people's faces as they are speaking. It enables them to take in information because they are looking at the people talking to them. It improves their interactive attention span because they are looking at what we are doing and are thus plugged in. It helps them to develop facial expression because they are looking at our faces. And it paves the way for learning to read others' facial and nonverbal expressions, one of the most socially limiting deficits our children face. Nonverbal communication in general. While the first of the 4 fundamentals notes eye contact as a major priority, it also includes all other types of nonverbal communication: making gestures, reading the gestures of others, being more expressive facially, reading others' expressions, prosody, having inflection in one's voice, and reading the voice inflections of others. Nonverbal communication rarely gets sustained focus. Verbal communication tends to get the lion's share of attention. And while verbal communication is extremely important, it is, after all, the second fundamental, the vast majority of interpersonal communication takes place nonverbally. Admittedly, nonverbal communication can be a bit more complex to notice and to work on with your child. The Sunrise Program Developmental Model tracks and measures nonverbal communication and includes goals and activities to develop this area. For now, though, it will be best for you to simply model nonverbal communication by exaggerating all of your own facial expressions, gestures, and voice inflections while focusing your teaching efforts and goals around eye contact. Strategies. You want to take every opportunity to request eye contact. There are several strategies to do this. 1. Ask for it directly. Examples: I love when you look at me. Give me one more look, you silly goose. Or, I love giving you this ride, but I'm so tired. Look at me so I can keep going. 2. Ask for it indirectly. For instance, hey, who are you talking to, sweetie? I'm not sure because you're not looking at me. Or simply point to your eyes. 3. Position for eye contact. You want to make it as easy as possible for your child to look at you with the least amount of effort. This entails keeping your face at his eye level as much as possible without being in his face. If your child is playing on the floor, you want to get down on the floor and sit or lie with your face as low as possible so he doesn't have to twist his head all the way up to look at you. You want him to be able to easily flick you a glance. If your child is staring at something off to his left, you can get your face down low next to what he's staring at. Again, you don't want to be right in your child's face. In fact, distance can often be more helpful here. If you create a bit of physical distance between you and your child, it will actually be easier for him to look at you because he will have to move his head and eyes less. 4. When you offer something to your child that she wants, hold it up next to your eyes. This can apply to food, a toy, a ball, a bracelet, whatever. As you're doing this, you can ask, "Is this what you want?" Or you can simply say, "Here's your ball." You can even say nothing and simply hold the item up by your eyes with an excited expression on your face. 5. Celebrate eye contact whenever you get it from your child. This might feel a bit funny at first, but it is very important. Every single time you get eye contact, thank your child or cheer for your child. Of course, you will want to make this celebration appropriate to your child's age and maturity level, and you will want to be aware of not shouting if your child has sensitive hearing. We will talk more about celebration overall in Chapter 11. Activity time! Pick a 15-minute block of time during the day or evening when you have one-on-one time with your child. This can be when you give her a bath, when you put her to bed, when you read her a story, during a meal, or simply when you are playing or hanging out with her. Before you begin your session, write down how many times you think your child will look at you, right at your eyes or face, during this 15-minute period. It does not matter in the least if you are right, or even if you are remotely close. This is just so you can begin to see the difference between your guess and reality. Just before you begin, make sure you have a pen and paper. During the 15-minute time, you are going to make a tick mark on your paper every time your child looks at your face or eyes. You don't have to be perfect. Don't stress about it. You're just trying to get a ballpark figure. After the 15 minutes are over, count up your tick marks and write that number down. You can do this as often as you like. It is designed to get you started so that you can begin to pay attention to roughly how much eye contact you're getting. You may be surprised by how much less eye contact you're getting than you originally guessed. The good news, following the principles in this book can lead to exceptional gains in this area. Online resources. For more in-depth help with the principles and techniques of this chapter, please go to www.autismbreakthrough.com/chapter 6. Starting point. Cheer and celebrate any eye contact that you get. This is the most important beginning principle for increasing voluntary eye contact. Have fun. Chapter 7, Fundamental 2, Verbal Communication. Unless your child is highly verbal, you are probably very aware of your child's speech deficits and very motivated to help your child overcome them. Before we get into specific language building strategies, though, it is vital to discuss the necessary precursor to all speech in children with autism. Believing that your child can speak. I want to talk for a moment to those of you who have a child who has not spoken at all yet. A common trap that people fall into is to start believing, either because they've been told or because they've been waiting a long time to hear their child speak, that their child can't speak. Your child's current lack of speech tells you absolutely nothing about his future speech. It tells you nothing about his potential to speak. It only tells you what is happening right now. The perspective you want to hold is not, "My child can't speak." Rather, it is, "My child hasn't spoken yet." And furthermore, "My child can do this." As I said about creativity earlier, I'm not making these statements as part of some rah-rah motivational speech. Believing that your child can or cannot speak has a practical impact on two things: whether your child speaks and whether you hear your child speak when he does. Let's discuss that last bit for a moment. We have a course called the Sunrise Program Intensive, where parents come to the ATCA with their child. The family stays in their own private apartment, which includes a state-of-the-art autism-friendly playroom. There, our facilitators work one-on-one with each child for 5 days. At the same time, our teachers work one-on-one with parents in an individualized program that is customized around each family's needs and concerns. I'm telling you all of this because of something fascinating that we've seen multiple times in the intensive program. We've had numerous instances where a child will speak for the very first time during this program. One of the walls of the child's playroom is made of one-way glass, on the other side of which is an observation room where parents can sit and observe what we are doing with their child whenever they like. As a side note, I would counsel that you beware of any program or school where they don't permit you, as the parent, to observe what is happening with your child. Not surprisingly, when parents witness their child speak for the first time, they often have a huge emotional reaction. Some cry, some clap, some stand up and cheer, some turn around and hug one of us on staff if we're in the observation room with them. Participating in such an experience is indescribably beautiful. However, in some cases, we see no reaction at all. This might sound strange to you. If your child has not yet spoken, you are probably thinking that you would sprout wings and fly if you heard your child speak, right? So why would any parent not react? The answer is simple. Every parent reacts with joy, excitement, gratitude, and great emotion the first time their child speaks. Unless they don't hear it. You heard that right. We have parents with no hearing problems whatsoever who are sitting in the observation room watching their child speak for the very first time, and they neither see nor hear it. When this occurs, it is because these parents have been told many, many times that their child cannot speak, and eventually they believed it. We have had scenarios where we have had to play back video footage of a child speaking 7 or 8 times before the parents watching could hear their child speaking. Think about this. If you cannot hear when your child speaks, you cannot react to it and build upon it. On top of that, we find that parents, therapists, and teachers don't persevere in endeavoring to get speech when they don't believe that the child is capable of speaking. And yet, it is precisely this perseverance that is necessary for many of our children to develop language. It is of monumental importance that you believe that your child has the capability to speak, no matter what you've been told. Just remember, my parents were given a long list of items, including speech, that they were told I would never be capable of. Instead of believing in the predictions, they believed in me. Giving language meaning. Sometimes, in our singular effort to get our child speaking, we can become overly focused on getting our child merely to repeat words. I see parents fall into this trap in one of 2 ways. The first is to point at an object, name it, and then try to get the child to repeat the word just spoken. The second is to say a sentence, leave the final word blank, and attempt to get the child to say the missing word. For example, a parent might say, "It's time to go to," and then endeavor to get his or her child to say the word sleep. The problem with these strategies is that even when you are successful at getting your child to say the word, there is no real communication being taught. Your child does not know what the word means and has no independent interest in the word being taught. Many parents come to the startup program seeking help with their children's language. Indeed, we have specific parts of the course devoted to verbal communication. During those segments, parents of highly verbal children are in a separate class more appropriate for their children. Before Charlotte attended the startup program, her son James was totally nonverbal. During the week following the conclusion of that course, he said his first 3 words: Dipsy, his favorite Teletubby, red ball, his favorite bouncy ball, and tiger, his favorite stuffed animal. I tell you this to highlight a particular point. All 3 of James's first words had intrinsic meaning to him. He didn't say them because Charlotte felt that they were the most important words for her son to learn first. He said them because they referred to items that were important to him. When helping your child to use language, you always want to challenge her to use the words that have meaning to her. You want the words to be linked to things that she already wants or cares about. If your child likes squash, as James does, you can begin with the word squash, but only when you have squash handy. Then you can take a piece of squash out, get excited about it, offer it to your child, and say, "Squash," right as your child takes it. Next, you can offer another piece, this time inviting your child to say squash for you to hand it to her. I have to tell you, when James would say, "I want quash, please," he wasn't big on the S sound yet. I felt like I was going to keel over from cuteness overdose. As a side note, Charlotte and I never focused on teaching James to say please. We had bigger fish to fry. He simply picked it up from hearing his polite mom. Many children like having their feet squeezed. Here, you could do the same thing as with the squash. You might enthusiastically place your hands right above your child's feet and say, "Squeeze!" Then you give his feet a big squeeze. Next, you could offer the squeeze again, this time having him say the word, and immediately responding with a huge squeeze if he does. When James would say this, he would drop the initial S and say, "Squeeze my feet, please," which would lead to yet another near-death cuteness overdose. The point is that you want your child to be learning words that are relevant to him, not just words for words' sake. Words. Making them worth your child's while. It is crucial that your child see using words as worth her while. How you respond to your child's language or attempts at language will be the chief factor in making this happen. Since you might have a child who must work extra hard for now to produce language, your child needs to see an immediate and powerful connection between using words and getting what she wants. Here are 5 key strategies to make using language far more appetizing for your child. 1. Move fast. When your child uses a word such as ball, run and get it. Don't stroll. Don't walk briskly. Run. If you are getting something on the shelf, get it fast and with great excitement. Often, we meander over to get our children what they want when they use language. Other times, we're busy and we tell them later. From now on, unless something is on fire, you want to stop the presses and move heaven and earth to get your child what he wants when he uses words. Don't worry about spoiling your child. Right now, we want language. If your child is crying, pulling, or tantruming to get what he wants, that's a different story. We'll go over these types of situations in Chapter 14. 2. Celebrate any language you get. We will talk more about celebration overall in Chapter 11, but we don't want to forget about its importance here. It's easy to leave this out, especially as your child speaks more. Always, always celebrate language. Celebrate words. Celebrate parts of words. Celebrate sentences. Say something like, "Thank you so much for using your words. Here you go." Then hand your child what she is asking for. You can vary this so that you're celebrating in a host of different manners. 3. Request language. This might seem obvious, but I watch many parents give their children items when their child points, pushes, cries, etc. Since you know your child so well, you may be able to discern what he wants with these kinds of signals as opposed to actual words. I can totally understand if you feel tempted to read and respond to all of these nonverbal signals. Next time, when you get one of these signals, pause and ask for a word. "Oh, I know you want something. Use your words and I'll run and get it." Or, "Say ball and I'll get it right down for you." Note, only request language when your child clearly wants something. That's when you have his engagement and thus leverage. 4. Choose useful words. When choosing which words to ask for, pick words that are either items your child wants, nouns such as ball, block, food, tiger, drink, etc., or actions you can do that are fun, verbs such as squeeze, tickle, rub, bounce, ride, etc. You want to choose words that are specific for objects you can immediately give or actions you can immediately do. Don't choose items you can't or don't want to provide or do, such as ice cream or drive. 5. Get progressively more clueless. As your child improves her language, you want to keep shifting what you understand, so she has to expand the length of her sentences in order to be understood. If your child already says single words, ball, start to understand only 2-word phrases, want ball or red ball. If she already uses 2-word phrases, work on 3-word phrases and so on. The ATCA's programs director, William Hogan, developed the concept of the communication ladder to outline this process. The communication ladder. The steps of the communication ladder are: 1. From crying, screaming, tantruming, pushing, etc., to partial word sounds, i.e. ba for ball. 2. From partial word sounds to single words. 3. From single words to multiple word phrases. 4. From multiple word phrases to sentences. 5. From sentences to single exchanges. We call these loops. One loop would be when you make a statement or ask a question and your child responds, or vice versa. 6. From single loops to multiple loops. 7. From multiple loops to conversations. Let's look at the first 3 steps a little more closely for those of you whose child has little or no language. The first order of business is to make your home an environment where your child cannot simply get everything for himself. Most children that we work with live in homes where most of what they want is directly accessible to them. They can open the refrigerator and get food. They can retrieve any toy that they want to play with. The problem with this situation is that there's no reason for a child who has huge difficulties with language to try to produce words when he can simply get what he wants himself. You can ask for language all day, but if your child needs only to reach for what he wants, you have an uphill journey ahead of you. If your child has little or no language, you must be the getter of all things. Everything must be out of reach so that your child has the chance to see that if he says something, you are going to get it for him. Language has force. Language has power. Language is useful, and you must be the vehicle to show this to your child. Second, make sure that in the early stages of your child speaking, you are very responsive to parts of words such as ba or ga. Do your absolute best to discern what these sounds mean and respond according to these steps. Let your child get used to seeing that these partial words work to communicate. Once he is using these sounds regularly, then you can move to the next step in the communication ladder by getting more clueless and asking for or responding to whole words. Third, in these early stages of language development, you will have the most leverage to challenge your child to speak when he wants something. So make sure you use every one of these instances to ask for, respond to, and wildly celebrate language. At first, you may find that your child becomes a wanting machine, using language mainly to ask for things and give people orders. That's okay. In fact, that's wonderful. He is learning the key fundamentals of verbal communication. When your child gets proficient and consistent at asking for or demanding things that he wants, then we can move to the next stage. Beyond I want. Verbal communication is not just about using words or about vocabulary size, although these things are certainly important. Computers can use language, but they don't have friends. So, although vocabulary size is one of the aspects of communication that is tracked in the Sunrise Program developmental model, it is not by itself the be-all and end-all of language. Because most people tend to focus only on numbers of words in a child's vocabulary, one of the items that gets missed is what a child is using her words for. In the Sunrise Program developmental model, we call this the function of verbal communication. This area is particularly relevant to children on the autism spectrum. The first function, or purpose, of using language is to get needs and wants met. I want food. I want my toy. I don't want a bath. Indeed, helping your child to clearly see that using words is the most powerful way to get what she wants is essential. The good thing about this stage is that there is a very clear connection between talking and getting an immediate want met. We don't want to stop there, though. Once your child can reliably articulate what she wants or doesn't want, we want to build up to more overtly social kinds of language, such as speaking to start or continue an interaction or game, explaining or talking about a particular aspect of an interaction or game, sharing a story, telling someone how you feel or what you like, finding out more about someone, what they want to do next, what they like, how they feel, etc. Eventually, discussing points of view, interests, hopes, and dreams. These are the functions of language that give verbal communication its richness. We can begin to build these parts of language by making them into goals. Some sample goals. saying a word to indicate what is happening, such as exclaiming running when he or someone else is running. Articulating her enjoyment of something, such as saying feels good when you are squeezing her feet. Saying one feeling he has. Explaining simple instructions of a game to you. Sharing something that she likes to do before bed. Telling a story of something that happened that day. Asking you one question about yourself. Asking you what you want. Not teaching verbal communication in a vacuum. Often, parents, teachers, and therapists get verbal communication tunnel vision. They know the value of language, so it becomes the overriding priority. Without question, speech is very important. But remember, autism is a social relational disorder. Language is part of a much larger issue. If it weren't, you would have a child who looks at people, loves people, plays interactive games with people, is flexible, laughs at jokes, makes friends, and gestures emphatically and understandably to express his thoughts. In other words, you would have a non-autistic child who simply has a speech deficit. When we teach verbal communication in a vacuum, it means we don't teach it in the context of other types of communication. For instance, I've met children and adults on the spectrum who can speak fluently but have no eye contact, no voice inflection, no facial expression, no friends, and little interest in other people. It's not that this is bad or a failure in any way. It is wonderful that these people have come as far as they have. But they could be helped so much more if, in addition to language, someone were helping them with all of the components that go with language. Don't forget clarity. One area of language that is especially easy to overlook is clarity. Because you really know your child, you have a heightened ability to understand her. In many ways, this is a testament to your love and caring. However, you might not realize if your child is not making herself understood to others. Being able to speak so that non-family members understand her is an important part of progressing through the 5 stages of verbal communication. As you begin to address this challenge, I have 2 recommendations. The first one is to have 1 or 2 people come to your house, not at the same time, and see if they can understand what your child is saying. This will help give you a more objective picture. The second recommendation is to play dumb. If your child says something to you in a mumbling way, you can say something like, "Thank you, sweetie, for telling me what you want. I want to get it for you, but I couldn't understand you. Can you say it again slowly?" Then pause exactly where you are and wait for her to try again. There are additional ways to improve clarity, but for now the idea is to become much more aware of how clearly your child speaks, if your child speaks, and to keep encouraging more clarity. We've talked a lot about what to do with regard to developing language. Let's highlight some very important things not to do. Talking too much. One of the most common mistakes I see is for people to constantly narrate what is happening when they're with their child. "There you go, bouncing the ball. Wow, what a big castle you're building. I'm giving my doll a special hairdo. Oh, look, there's a picture of 2 rabbits running across a field. And there we go, I give 1 to you and take 1 for myself." Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with any of these sentences by themselves. But I often hear parents and therapists conducting a nonstop string of these sentences. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching a narrated play. What's the problem with narrating? When you do this, you take up all of the verbal space. When you take up all of the verbal space, there is no room for your child to speak. Unless you have a fluently verbal child, it takes a lot of effort for your child to produce speech, and it takes a lot of time. You need to give your child that time. The more space, that is silence, you give, the more opportunities your child will have to speak. Along similar lines, don't constantly pepper your child with questions. This can also take up a lot of verbal space. In addition, it creates what your child will often perceive as a pressure around language, which he may push against. I'm not saying not to ask questions, I'm just saying not to produce a constant stream of questions. 15 years ago, when I began working with my niece Jade, I was Mr. Talkative. I asked her lots of questions. I made lots of statements. I threw out lots of suggestions. And Jade didn't say a word. Bryn and William observed my first session, and they told me that I was taking up all of the verbal space with my own speaking. I took in what they said, but I was secretly thinking to myself, I'm sure I didn't talk that much. Then they played me back a video of my session. I was flabbergasted by the sheer quantity of my talking. I cringed as I watched, wanting to shout at myself, "Just shut up for a minute!" The next time I worked with Jade, I focused on listening to her. It wasn't that I never ever spoke in that session, but since I was deeply focused on being attentive to her and to anything that she might say, I found that I had a lot less to say. In that session, Jade, who was in the early stages of speech, blurted out a word every few minutes. The difference in her quantity of speech in the two sessions was astounding. So, make sure that you leave plenty of room for your child to speak. You can do this not by trying to stifle yourself, but rather by having a strong and ongoing intention to listen to your child. Using different terms for the same thing at different times. Sometimes, when offering your child food, you might say, "eat." Other times, you might say, "food." When offering your child a Thomas the Tank Engine toy, you might call it Thomas one time and train the next. This can make things very confusing for your child. It is very helpful to be totally consistent with the words you use. It doesn't matter what you decide to call the big purple ball with the pictures of Shrek on it, but whatever you decide, call it the exact same thing every time. This does not apply, of course, to fluent, highly verbal children where language is not their challenge. With these children, you actually want to encourage more variation. But for children just learning to speak, using the same word for the same thing every time is key. Teaching the words more and again. This one's a biggie. More and again are two easy words to teach, and your child will love to use them. Why? Because once your child learns these two magic words, she doesn't need to learn much else. Your child can get 90% of what she wants with these two words, or with the sign language versions of them. You know how we talked about it being worth your child's while to speak? Well, you don't want to create a situation where your child has no earthly reason to learn and use new words. You want to teach your child to use specific words for specific things. You want her to say ride, not again, when she wants another ride on your back. You want her to say grapefruit, not more when she wants another grapefruit. This is how language is built. Using communication aids. This one might be hard to hear. You've probably been extensively schooled in using either Picture Exchange Communication System, PECS, sign language, or some variation of both. You may have put a lot of time into these aids, and maybe your child has gotten quite good at communicating with them. The thing is, what you really want is verbal communication. The only route to verbal communication is through spoken language. If you give your child a way to communicate and get all of his needs and wants met without speaking, why is he going to put in all of the hard work it requires to speak well? After all, your child now has a way around that. I'm not saying that it is impossible for your child to speak when you use these communication aids, but there is a dramatically reduced necessity for him to do so, and there is certainly no rush. Remember, we want verbal communication to be worth your child's while. In the short term, ditching these aids will make it harder for your child. The only way to effectively communicate will be to use words, and if your child was using communication aids, then by definition, using words is difficult for him. But if he gets better at verbal communication and does so faster, then this will be a gigantic boon to him. Only a tiny population understands PECS or sign language, but everyone understands the spoken word. So every time your child gets even a little better at speaking, an entire world opens up to him. You might be thinking, but what about those children who are truly unable to speak? Wouldn't we want to at least give these children some way to communicate? That is a legitimate question. In fact, we have had a few children over the years, not many, who have severe biophysiological obstacles that seem to prevent them from speaking. In these cases, yes, we do use PECS or sign language. But the real issue is who we are going to put into that category. We require a very, very large amount of convincing before we are willing to say, let's forget speech for now and focus on these other ways of communicating. We need to have attempted to get speech full throttle using Sunrise Program principles for at least a year before we will even consider going down this other road. A very special Thanksgiving. It was Charlotte and James' first Thanksgiving with my family. My parents, my brothers and sisters and their families, and a couple of longtime family friends were all gathered at my parents' house for the day. Throughout the day, members of my family took turns doing 1-hour, one-on-one Sunrise Program sessions with James in a bedroom set aside for this purpose. I have had many experiences being thankful for my family, but few could compete with the emotional gratitude I felt at this incredibly sweet and meaningful expression of love. I had my session early in the day, and Charlotte had hers last. At the end of Charlotte's session, it was early evening at this point, she came downstairs with her son. James was at a stage where he was very sensitive to environmental noise and commotion, and all of us who had been engaged in an animated discussion in the living room immediately hushed as Charlotte and James entered. Charlotte was holding her son in her arms, and he was staring at us with a very serious expression on his face. My mother said hello to James sweetly. James paused for a moment and then said, 10 ups. At that time, he had trouble with the S sound if it was followed by a consonant, so he would drop it and move it to the end of the word or phrase. So 10 ups really meant stand up. Often, if someone who was working with James would sit down, he would tell them to stand up. I guess he wasn't a fan of idleness. In this case, the moment he told us to stand up, every single person in the room, there were a lot of us, without any consultation with one another, wordlessly stood. James stared, transfixed. It was as if he were thinking, I said one little thing, and it got immediate and perfect results. I speak, and the world moves. We waited silently, smiling at him. Sit down, he said. Without a word, everyone sat. James could not take his eyes off us. 10 ups, he said, asking us to stand again. We all stood. Sit down, he said. We all sat. I looked at Charlotte, who had tears in her eyes. Never had she or her son been in such a responsive, loving, and James-friendly environment. Moreover, James, at this point in his life, would never speak, certainly not unsolicited, in the presence of a group. He might say those phrases in a one-on-one situation, but not with a host of people around, including many whom he barely knew. James continued to order us to stand, then sit, then stand again for 15 minutes. Then his mom took him to bed. Brief though it was, Charlotte and I would never forget that event. Activity time! The next activity is designed just to get you paying more attention to your child's language and how you react to it. Spend 15 minutes alone with your child focusing on verbal communication. Your goal will be to remember 1 to 3 words or phrases that she said to you during your 15 minutes. If your child isn't saying words yet, mark down speech-like sounds such as ba or ak on a piece of paper. Very important. For each word, phrase, or sound, you will write down how you responded. Did you clap? Did you cheer? Did you run and get your child something? Did you do nothing? Keep the session to no longer than 15 minutes for now. Getting an accurate reading of what your child is saying and how you responded is the most important thing at this stage. Online resources. For more in-depth help with the principles and techniques of this chapter, please go to www.autismbreakthrough